What else are we going to talk about? It's recruiting season, baby. Let's go. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a quick moment to ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content here, please take a second to subscribe to the show. Also, go to wherever you follow your audio versions of podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever that happens. Follow it there. It really helps the show grow. Truly appreciate all of that support. Every follow, subscription, download, it helps create more revenue for UConn NAL because when you support Locked On UConn, we're donating 10% of all of our revenue to Bleeding Blue for Good. So by supporting the show, you're directly supporting the UConn athletic program. Thank you for being a part of this community. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order for a limited time. Check out 5hourenergy.com and use that code LOCKEDONCFB. Okay, on today's show, we bring in Aaron Torres of the Aaron Torres podcast, nationally syndicated radio host. Let's get him on the show, a friend of the program, UConn alum. Aaron, first question, man. I'm going to jump right into it.
Ooh,
we got
hello, not even a how are you?
We know each other.
It's recruiting season. It's recruiting season.
We gotta get right to it. We got 6 major targets for these Huskies. I have a top 3. We'll get to it, and I'm sure you've heard it already. But I want to hear who is your must-have of these 6? You got Braylon Mullins, Eric Reibe, Meleek Thomas, Caden Lewis, Darius Adams, Nico Bandalo. If you had to have just one, who's the guy that's a must-have for Dan Hurley?
First off, whoever Dan Hurley takes, I just inherently trust that guy will be a first-round pick within 2 years. Right. So it's like, it's so stupid, right? It's like, well, hey, do you think Nick Saban should run cover 2 or cover 3? It's like, well, I'm going to trust Nick Saban to put in the defense that he thinks is best. But since this is your show and you do ask, I'll say Eric Reibe, and I think Meleek Thomas is the most talented, but he's probably a one and done. We know how gifted Braylon Mullins is, etc. I think the bottom line is a couple things. Is one, listen, it's cliche, but it's true. There just aren't a lot of 7-foot dudes as skilled as Eric Reibe that are just walking around planet Earth. I think the other thing is, I hate to be this crass, but I think in this portal world, I think that. One, there's always going to be a lot of talent available in the spring, but we're losing a lot of that talent because there's no more 5th-year COVID guys going forward. Right. So I think the stat was like 20% of the guys in the portal last offseason were COVID seniors. But 2, don't let Terrace Reed fool you, is there's just not that many big skilled guys that are going to do what Dan Hurley and hopefully Luke Murray is here this time next year, what Dan Hurley and Luke Murray want in that offense. So it's not to diminish Braylon Edwards. By the way, I've said Braylon Edwards 37,000
I'm sure you have, because I've done it too.
It's not to diminish Braylon Mullins. It's not to diminish any of the guards. And again, Meleek Thomas, Darius Adams, you go on and on down the list. But when you get a 7-foot kid that's skilled, that can step right in, I just think, to me, that's the one that if you can only get one, because I don't think you can find anything replicable in the portal, that's the guy that I want.
Yeah, I think there's some good points there. I think my number one target is Braylon Mullins, not because of it, to say that any of your points are wrong. I don't know, man. There's just something about these kids that come out of Indiana that, like, they want to go to Indiana, but guess what? The coaching staff is just not. It's just not favorable for him.
I heard you say some stuff about Mike Woodson the other day. Well, goodness gracious, poor Mike Woodson just taking strays on the Locked On UConn pod.
I mean, listen, man, I'm only reporting what I've been told, and essentially, it's that Braylon loves Indiana, like he wants to go there. I'm not saying anything out of turn, but there's questions. Is Mike Woodson going to be there? Can he win at Indiana? Is he going to have to turn around and transfer just like that? That's why I mentioned Dusty May as a pseudo Indiana potentially going there, or obviously Dan Hurley with UConn.
Well, and it's not only is he going to be there. I mean, he has. I don't want to say Mike Woodson hasn't developed guards because Jalen Hood-Schifino was a first-round draft pick. But what has been the knock on day one since Mike Woodson has got there? It's been 3-point shooting and kind of quote unquote the modern offense that we hear so much about. And so if you're Braylon Mullins, and I almost said Edwards again, if you're Braylon Mullins, what by the way, whether you're a one and done, a 3-year guy, a 4-year guy, you want to go to a system that is going to highlight your strengths. And I think there are a lot of great systems. You know, it's not just UConn. It could be Mark Pope at Kentucky. It could be, some of the, Dusty May, to your point, in Michigan. Obviously, UNC is going to be losing RJ Davis after this season. But I don't know that Indiana is it. And so again, whether you're a one and done, whether you're a 3-year guy, it doesn't matter. You want to go to a place where your skill set is going to be valued. And this isn't a knock on Indiana. If they're his choice, I'm not the person that's tweeting at recruits because I disagree. Whatever he thinks is best for him. But I think there's something to, Mike Woodson. One, is he going to be there? But 2, is he even running a system that is going to benefit Braylon Mullins when he does get to a college campus?
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, what do you make of, because you're locked in on the Kentucky beat or the Kentucky world as far as recruiting goes. What do you make of almost like there's like a teaming up potentially of, I think, Jasper Johnson, Caleb Wilson, and maybe a Caden Lewis all going to Kentucky? They kind of messed around with some people last week on Twitter and kind of intimated on that. What do you think the odds of that happening are?
I think it's early. I think Caleb Wilson, I know from the UConn perspective, isn't really a prospect that UConn fans necessarily care about, but it's always worth noting when you cancel other visits and move up your commitment timeline shortly after taking a visit, like Caleb Wilson did at Kentucky last week. That to me is always worth kind of noting. And so if we think that Kentucky's maybe the favorite in that recruitment, then it comes down to obviously a Caden Lewis, a guy that, is much more of an interest to UConn fans. I think from a Caden's perspective, obviously, the visit to stores here within the last couple of days, I do think that probably if I was a betting, if we were putting betting odds, I would put it at a UConn Kentucky matchup right now, if you will. I don't know that I feel confident, and maybe you do, and I would love your perspective actually, that one necessarily leads the other. But it was certainly interesting. And you can certainly see why. And by the way, it's also worth noting, you can kind of see how all those pieces fit, where you go to a Braylon Mullins. Is there an overlap with Jasper Johnson, the 5-star that just committed to Kentucky a few weeks ago? Don't think there's an overlap with Jasper Johnson and a potential a Caden Lewis commitment as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to that in the next segment. But what I will say as almost like a tease is I think we're going to get some dominoes to drop. And I'm the next question I'm going to ask you is who will be that next domino to drop? Like if you had to bet on it, whether of all of the recruits that we mentioned already today, which of those is going to be the domino to drop? We're going to go pay one bill and then come back, just one bill, and come back and talk about that coming up after this. If you're like me, you've got a packed schedule, and some days you need that extra boost to stay focused. And that's where 5-Hour Energy comes in. With 0 sugar, just 4 calories, 5-Hour Energy gives you the quick and long-lasting energy you need without that crash later. It's easy to take on the go, whether you're getting ready for work, a workout, or doing a podcast. 5-Hour Energy has your back. Just take one shot and you're good to go for hours. Right now, you can save 20% off your order by visiting 5hourenergy.com using the promo code LOCKEDONCFB at checkout. Don't miss out. Get your energy boost and get more out of your day. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with Aaron Torres, the Aaron Torres podcast and Fox Sports Radio. Aaron, I teased this a little bit. If you had to pick of these guys, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a UConn domino that drops. It could just be of these 6, right? Because UConn's not getting all 6 of these. They don't want all 6. I don't care what anyone says. They don't want 6 freshmen coming in. They don't have the room. They have three guys, potentially more with people leaving for the draft or transfer. So I think there's going to be 2 to 3 players that they get. Of all of these dominoes to drop, who's the first player that goes of those 6? Whether it's a Caden, Darius, is it Meleek, Eric Reibe, or is it Nico Bandala, or is it Braylon Mullins?
Well, Braylon Mullins has said he wants to commit before the start of his senior year. Obviously, cutting the list to 5. We expect him to take that visit to Kentucky, and then I think from there it's commitment mode decision time. So I would probably say Braylon Mullins feels like it's going to be right around November 1st, before the early signing period. I don't know that I feel great about any of the other ones. And, I listen, would I be surprised forget UConn, if any of them commit? I don't know that I would be. The one thing I keep cautioning people, and I say this on my show often, I think for the best players, I do think you're going to see more and more guys push into the springtime to make commitments. And people think, oh, it's all NIL. They're trying to squeeze the collective for every last dollar. No. We got to remember, and this, because I saw your numbers in April. I saw my own numbers in April. It's chaos in April. And a lot of these kids, talking to the parents and the people that help them behind the scenes, it's not just NIL. It's, hey, if you're committing to a UConn, let's just use UConn as an example. We think Liam McNeely's leaving, but we don't know. There could be a transfer from that sophomore class, but we don't know. There could be on the opposite side. A Jalen Stewart blows up. All of a sudden, he's a first-round pick. He leaves. And so a lot of parents and people around these kids are just saying, listen, if you love a school and if you're going to lose your spot, if you're let's just use a hypothetical. If you're an Indiana kid that loves Indiana, I'm not saying Braylon Mullins specifically, and it's your dream school, it's where you've always wanted to go, you have an offer on the table, take it. But if there's 2 or 3 schools, you kind of like them, or even if there's one school, but things can just get, sideways. It's all a long-winded way of me saying that I just think as time goes on and as more and more roster building is done in April and May, I think we're going to see a lot of these elite high school players wait longer and longer. I know it's a little bit of a cop-out, but Braylon Mullins, it feels like before National Signing Day, wants to be committed and signed. So that's the easy one from my perspective. Is there one that I said that I didn't say that you would say?
I'm with you on Braylon. I think that there's definitely smoke there because people have reached out to me specifically and said that they're getting close to making a decision. I will say this because I know you have Kentucky fans, and I'm sure they'll watch this too. And I say this, and I'm not disparaging Kentucky. I think Marc Pope's doing a great job so far with what with transfer portal and everything. I know there's a little rivalry with UConn and Kentucky fans, but put that aside. I think just so we're being clear, a lot of these decisions where he's going to take visits, like guys going to Carolina or Duke, a lot of times they go to these visits because they're truly just trying to get a feel for. They may not be thinking about that's their number one choice. It's like anything. Like you go to a college to check it out if you're not an athlete. You want to see if this is a place that you can be. Your first choice may be someplace else. You get that offer, you go. But if it doesn't work out there and you like that place, you can go there in the transfer portal now. It is absolutely open season. So that's why you're not seeing a lot of guys going, oh, I'm automatically going to North Carolina. I'm automatically going to Duke. Like even Cooper Flagg we all knew he was picking Duke, but UConn made it really hard on him because he was just like, man, look what they offer. The intensity, like this Dan Hurley stuff, that was an option for him. But he obviously ultimately picked Duke. So when I say like a player, like I think Braylon is picking between Indiana and UConn. That's it. Like I don't think that there's a chance that Kentucky has to get him, but it's also because Marc Pope can come calling next year. If he goes to Indiana and they tank, Marc Pope's gonna be on the call, man. We had a great time. You want to come back down to Lexington?
Or really quickly to your point, Mike Woodson gets fired after the season. It's a disappointment. UConn, maybe a solo ball is coming back. A Jaden Ross is coming back. Ahmad Noah, and all of a sudden there's not that obvious spot in the backcourt that you thought was there. Well, now you have that relationship, and that is one thing I would say. I know UConn fans are super just plugged into the world of college basketball, but what you just said is 100% the God's honest truth. Is that there are so many coaching staffs now that they cast a wide net in the summertime. They might only take a guy or two per class, but it's to build that relationship. Like you said, even if it's bringing a kid on campus, knowing that they're not going to get him, hey, come here. Let's get to know you a little bit better. Let's you get to know us a little bit better, because in this portal world, you just never know. I mean, I remember this was now 4 or 5 years ago. I remember talking to Bruce Pearl when Walker Kessler out of high school was down to Carolina and Auburn. And it was a really tough decision for Walker Kessler. He goes to Carolina. It doesn't work out. Boom. He's in the portal and Auburn's the choice. And and Bruce Pearl said, like, look, we never want to burn a bridge in the first place, but we also understand now, and this was again 4 or 5 years ago, we understand that just because you don't get that yes right away doesn't mean that you're never going to have the opportunity to coach him again. So it's just a very important thing in this world. By the way, that applies to the fans out there too. No tweeting negativity at anybody.
Exactly.
If there's a kid that you thought you were getting that you don't, because you just never know, again, when the opportunity will present itself to potentially coach that kid or root for that kid down the road.
And dude, I couldn't have said any better. That is so spot on. I don't want any UConn fans, especially Locked On fans, that watch
don't
the show
tweet at Mark if Mark gets a recruiting prediction wrong or Torres gets her. I will say, because I heard your show the other day where you said, listen, these are my projections right now. Recruiting changes fast. I don't know about you, but I get this crap all the time. Well, Torres, you said this 6 weeks ago. Well, yeah, 6 weeks in college basketball recruiting might as well be 4 years. Like it's like
so true.
It's so. I mean, in 48 hours, things can completely change. So let alone 5-6 weeks. I mean, I'm the guy. You can find the videos. I said Meleek Thomas is done to UConn.
Me too.
You know, start building the graphic right now. Let's get it done. And it's like stuff just changes so quick. So I don't mean to hijack this. No.
It's a great topic to bring up. I want to talk about Meleek Thomas really quick, because the last person I had on the show that's really plugged into like the high school level, that Stock Risers, Jake Weingarten, he was a great guest on the show. He was saying how a lot of coaches are essentially kind of like frustrated with Meleek because he cancels all the time, like his visits, like he's pushing things back. It almost feels like he's not taking it really seriously. And I think that plays into, and people are going to think I'm being a UConn homer here, but we all know Dan Hurley. Dude doesn't play. And so if you are not locked in to coming to UConn, at least for like, you know, staying that connection, and I could be wrong. Like, honestly, the relationship could be fantastic. But the fact that, God, like I've heard Calipari's like frustrated. Isn't this guy coming? Is he not coming? He canceled on Nate Oates. Like, what do you think the deal is there? Do you think it's the overtime elite stuff? Because I know they have some relationships with specific schools, and I truly believe that's why he's not done to UConn. But I'm curious, like, do you think he's just biding his time and he'll figure it out? Like, he's just one of these kids that isn't taking this seriously. I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, I don't have a great answer, Mark, and I certainly don't want to disparage a kid that I don't really know the background.
And I'm sure I heard he's great. I heard he's a great person. Like, I've had people on the show. Let me just say that really quick. Tobias Bass came on and said, this dude is all about his teammates and his players. Like, so this isn't anything about Meleek's character. I'm just curious what your thoughts are of the process.
No, and that's what I was going to say. I'm not disparaging him as a person, but I have noticed that as well. And it started as a UConn thing. He comes in mid-June right after the Hurley Lakers stuff. And oh my God, that was, that got me really excited to potentially play for this guy and and this and that. And then, you get through the summer circuit and you still feel good. And then all of a sudden it's late July, early August, and nothing happens. And then all of a sudden he wants to take more visits. But then I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, again, was supposed to visit Arkansas, gets pushed back, was supposed to visit Alabama, gets pushed back. And listen, I think, every kid is a little bit of a different scenario. I know he's cut his list to 7. This was 5-6 weeks ago now. But maybe he's considering other schools or this or that or whatever. I really don't know. And by the way, maybe it's as simple as what we just talked about a minute ago. Maybe he's just, hey, I really liked UConn, or I really liked Arkansas or Alabama, but at the same time, stuff changes. I need to protect myself. And maybe he becomes a kid that commits in February, March, April of next year. I don't know. But I have noticed that as well, is that it's been a little surprising for me to see all the canceled visits, all the time that all of these staffs, not just the UConn staff, but all these staffs have put in. And it just feels like he's pretty inconsistent with where he's going and even who is the perceived leader, things like that.
For sure. Could be just high school kids changing their mind 1,000 times, right? Could be as simple as that. Coming up after the break, we're going to pay one more bill on this, and then we're going to come back and talk about, I want to get Aaron's answer on UConn's number. Is it 2? Is it 3? Where does he think they need to land? And then get a kind of a 30,000-foot view about what's going on in recruiting around the country. Coming up after this. We all know the Game Time app. It's amazing for everyone. Like I told you guys a couple weeks ago, I had my cousin Alex, who just moved down to North Carolina. He wanted tickets. We got him tickets through the Game Time app for the UConn game, and he had a great time with his family. He downloaded the app. He used the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, saved $20. It was essentially one free ticket, which was fantastic for him and his family. So don't miss out on any of these big games and events, even if it's something like a game that you don't think you're gonna get a chance to go to, like a Duke UConn football game. Had a great time. Loved it. You can get anything on Game Time. So check it out. Make sure you use the code LOCKEDONCFB for $20 off your first purchase. And we're back on Locked On UConn, last segment of the program with Aaron Torres, the Aaron Torres podcast and Fox Sports Radio. Aaron, I was going to ask you this question, and we went on a little bit of a tangent, which is totally fine, as is easy to do in recruiting season. They're targeting 6 teams. UConn is, or six players. I think they're guaranteed to get 2, but I think there's a potential for 3 for the exact same reason that you just mentioned a while ago in the show. We don't know who's going to transfer. We don't know who's going to be available in the transfer portal in the future. We don't know who's going to have a monster year. Liam, Jalen, who may have a poor year. One of the guys that the sophomores could potentially transfer out. So if you had just your gut feeling, not who it is, do you think it's 2 guys for them or 3?
My gut tells me 2, because you are almost certainly going to have the 2 current freshmen. Well, 2 of the 3. Obviously, I don't even include Liam. He committed so late. But, Ahmad Noel, Isaiah Abraham are obviously I would expect to be back. Yep. I would expect most of the core 4 of that now sophomore class to be back. So I just don't think you have to. And by the way, Aiden Mahaney's got eligibility, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I tend to think, you don't want to overdo it with the freshmen. Because 1, it's just young mouths to feed, don't know their role, whatever. And then 2, you can plug and play in the portal. And again, I know I just sold that the portal probably won't be as fruitful as it's been next off season as it has been in previous ones, but there's still going to be hundreds of kids. If you're UConn, you're not going to need a 20-point-a-game scorer. You're not going to get it from this high school class anyway. And so my hunch is they take 2, wait for portal season to maybe add another body or 2, depending on how the season goes. But you said you feel differently. You said you think they're going to go 3. Is that what you said?
I think they may go 3, and I think it's mostly because I think you have to assume. And I was just terrible because I don't want any of these guys to transfer. I don't want it to be Jay Stu. I don't want Youssef. I don't want not Jay Stu or Jay Ross. Who's to say? I don't know this is going to happen, but one of the guys like Aiden Mahaney or Isaiah Abraham or Ahmad Noel plays better than someone like Solo Ball. I'm not expecting that. I think Solo is going to take a nice leap, but eventually one of those 4, at least one of those guys is going to have to have a hard look conversation with Dan Hurley and his staff and go, I didn't really play a lot this year. And maybe it's because people are better than him, but they can go to someplace else and we wish them well. So I think they just have to kind of hedge their bets because you can always go portal, but these guys are, we're not talking developmental players. I mean, for the most part, there are 4 or 5 stars in every one of those 6 guys. Like these are 5-star kids.
True.
I think Eric Reibe is like on the cusp of being a 5-star. Braylon just got elevated to a 5-star. Meleek is a 5-star. Darius Adams 5-star. So if they're not a 5-star, it's like they're number 27 of the top. You know what I mean? So we're not talking developmental players or 3 stars here. So I think that would be my reasoning why they may go 3, or it just could be dominoes, man. Like it just could be circumstance. They guys go other places, and then you only get 2, and you're happy with it. So my gut says 3. I'm happy with 2 because I think that's the guarantee.
Very good. By the way, you didn't answer the question I had to answer. Who do you think of the 5 to 6 or is the first 2 actually commit? It doesn't have to be UConn.
I think a Caden. I think a Caden's going to go to Kentucky. That's my prediction. And it's almost like people are like, are you doing reverse psychology jinxes? Are you saying I've heard people on other shows go, UConn insider said that such and such is going to Indiana. I think he's just afraid of them going to Kentucky. It's like, come on, man. I'm just telling you what I know, and people tell me things. It's okay. Sure. But let's talk about other programs.
Sure.
Because they affect UConn's ability to potentially win another national championship. I'm interested in folks that you cover. Mark Pope in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that he's falling into that Coach Calipari trap where a lot of these guys are coming in and they're 5-stars and he's getting a bunch of them, even in the transfer portal? How's he going to get this whole team to mesh in a short period of time? And are the Kentucky fans, is Big Blue Nation going to give him the leash that he needs to kind of get this done?
So it's tough on the recruiting front because on the one hand, I do kind of feel like, listen, when you've only been able to recruit 3-star kids and you got to develop the crap out of them, and now, you show up to the all-you-can-eat buffet and you can get anything, on the menu, or you show up at the steakhouse, you can get anything on the menu. And, a month ago, you couldn't afford to expense, the porterhouse or the filet, whatever. It's tough, though, because it is worth noting, like, they obviously went very portal heavy this year. I believe the number is 7 fifth-year players that they got out of the portal. So they need bodies. But I also think, again, listen, I like Pope. I think he will be good there. But I will also readily admit, the first probably 3 to 4 months of his time at Kentucky, it seemed like every press availability that he had, he made it a point to just say the opposite of whatever John Calipari would have said in that exact same situation. It's the truth. Oh, scheduling. At his opening press conference, the big thing was Calipari doesn't like playing the MTEs. First thing Pope says at his press conference, we're going to win the SEC tournament, the NCAA tournament. We're going to stop in Maui and win there too. And it's like, that was something that mattered to Kentucky fans. We're going to get older. We're going to recruit in state, blah, 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 this and that. And so, but I also think, to your point, I mean, let's say the Caden Lewis, Caleb Wilson package deal does happen. That's 3 top 35 prospects, 4 top 35 prospects with the 2 that they have committed. You'd think 2 or 3 of them are going to be one and done. And it's just, we know it's hard. It's not only hard to keep it coming, it's hard to get those guys to play within the team concept, to play well enough to be drafted, and then do it all over again year over year over year. So I'll be curious, because if you look at the roster, I think they're, what is it, a 14 scholarship limit right now? I think they had 13. I could be wrong. 3 of them are like developmental freshmen, and then like 2 of them, but then the rest of them are out of eligibility. So the only point I'm trying to make is, you said you think a Caden's probably going to be a Wildcat. I'll trust your judgment on that. 4 freshmen, all really good. They all expect to play. I think it gets a little dicey. I will say, I think he gets a little bit more time than most because he is the Kentucky kid, not kid, but he played there. He won a championship there. And, and the one thing I will say in his defense, and I don't know him well, but I've interviewed him a few times. He gets what the pressure's about. He gets what the day-to-day is about. None of this is a surprise to him. And I think it's worth noting, he knows, hey, the clock started the second that I walked out of that opening press conference. I got through the opening press conference to make everybody laugh and smile and cry. Now I got to start winning basketball games.
Yeah, I think he's going to be fine. I'm just curious, like you're seeing a lot of similar. I know the verbiage may be different, but the similarities are there in terms of, and we get it. It's Kentucky, so you're going to have people that want to come there just because it's Kentucky, and I get it. So, but let's go to the guy who used to roll that sideline, Calipari. Recruiting the same way, man. Same stars, a lot of they got some similar guys that were on his team. Got some transfers in. Is he just rinse, washing, repeat, and not understanding that when you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it? Do you think he actually will change a little bit to see if he can get out of that first weekend in Arkansas?
Well, I do think the fan base had been so toxic. I think there was some pressure. I think he will be good now that he has a fan base that believes in him. And I will say, and I've said this on my show a million times throughout the spring, is that the reset was good for everybody. It was good for Kentucky. It was good for him. It allowed him to kind of bring the guys he wanted to bring, leave the guys he wanted to leave, recruit the guys he wanted to recruit. And I actually really like his team this year and how all the pieces fit. Now, to your point, start looking at 2025. Has Darius Acuff committed? Just talked about Meleek Thomas. They're both primary ball handlers. Doesn't seem to matter to Cal. Kingston Fleming's another point guard, is visiting in a few weeks. Doesn't seem to matter to Cal. You have Caleb Wilson, kind of a weird fit. And it does feel like he is back to just recruiting off of a 24/7 or on-3 recruiting list and not putting together a team. He said before he left Kentucky, he did one media availability with his AD, and he said, I understand that you can't win in college basketball with 7 or 8 freshmen anymore. You need to find the balance of the older guys in the portal, the freshmen. And he did say that in his defense. He said, I'm never going to go away from the freshmen. I still believe if they're good enough, if they can have enough of an impact, if I can help them, then you can win with them. Point I'm trying to make. He said much like Mark Pope said all the right things when he got to Arkansas. It's a balance. It's a new sport. It's a this, it's a that. It still feels like he's trending towards easily a 5 to, I don't want to say easily, but potentially up to a 5 to 6 man recruiting class in 2025. I don't think that's the answer long-term. I will wait until April of 2025 to pass judgment on what his 2025, 2026 roster looks like, but it certainly does look like he is starting to fall into the same traps as he did at Kentucky.
Yeah.
Fair to say, right?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I was smiling through that entire segment just because
it's the truth, man.
It's the truth of the matter is, and I think this is where other fans hate us. UConn fans.
Well, everyone should, because Hurley's like the only, I've covered this stuff on a national level. There really aren't that many guys that have kind of figured out this era of college basketball. I mean, think about how we perceive Tony Bennett today in 2024 versus 5 years ago, just 5 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, seriously, like in college basketball today, what coaches do you really trust? Trust Dan Hurley, trust Nate Oates. After that, it's like, Roy Williams is gone. Coach K is gone. John Shire, I know he made an Elite 8. 7 guys hit the portal. He's got a team full of freshmen this year.
Right.
Hubert Davis, he had that run, but whatever. Kansas is coming off a disappointing year. And it's like, and you're right. Even when you think of like the older guys, like Bill Self, he's won 2. He's got a really talented team coming back. Houston seems to always falter around the Sweet 16. Yeah.
Elite 8. They made a 1 or 2 Final Fours to Calvin Sampson, but he's never won a title. So, it's an interesting. That's why you still see guys like the Craytons and the Marquettes still, floating around the Big East and being because they have solid coaches too. McDermott's a great coach. Shaka Smart. I think you can trust Shaka Smart.
You're right,
but he's had some faults since obviously making the Final Four with VCU.
That's what I'm saying. This past year was the first second weekend that he's been to since VCU in 2011 with Kemba and Alex Oriaki. It's like it's been a while for Shaka. And by the way, he's reinvented himself at Marquette, but it doesn't feel like a lot of guys. And we're still early in this kind of portal, constant free agency, NIL era. And I think some of it will start to get figured out over time. But I don't blame people for being jealous of UConn, because it's like Dan Hurley right now, at least for the last 2 years, is making it look easy.
Yeah. And honestly, I really hope the Cals and the Mark Popes of the world and all these other guys don't copy Dan Hurley. That's my hope. NFL is a copycat league. You see a lot of copycat offenses and defenses.
But you can't though. That's the brilliant part.
You can try. I think you can try, but I don't think
Alex Garabin was ranked like the 111th player in his class, and he is going to be, in my opinion, a first-round pick next year.
I totally understand that.
Donovan Clingan was 52 or whatever in his class.
Yep.
Everybody else could have recruited Donovan Clingan. Nobody else did. Now, could they have turned him into what should have been the number 1 overall pick in 2 years? I don't know. But, it's easy to just say, just get the guys that are good enough to play in the NBA, but they're not one and dones. It's like,
right.
Well, it's hard to identify those guys. Listen, there's only 60 guys that get drafted every year. It's hard to identify them. It's hard to keep them in the program if they're not stars. And so, I
understand what you're saying, but here's what I would say. And this is what I mean by you could definitely do this, because Dan Hurley's talked about this in interviews. If you're not obsessed like he is with basketball and winning in process, he doesn't respect you, and he wouldn't want you on his staff. So for the rest of the coaches out there who I respect, and I love the coaching profession. I think they're fantastic people. They're not doing what they're doing at UConn, because if they were, it wouldn't look so easy in the NCAA tournament. And here's the thing. You're right. It's anybody could have got Alex Garabin. Anybody could have gotten Donovan Clingan. But what other teams aren't doing is recruiting. Talk about this all the time. The parents. They're just not doing it. They're just looking at the kid, projecting where he's going to be, and they're saying, we'll take him, we'll figure it out. That's what kills programs. That's what kills culture. And that's something that Dan Hurley is just not something he'll do, not something he'll deal with. Well, that's where I think there's a huge gap.
I think the other thing is, I know it's easy to say, they're just out working people. One, I do think the recruiting with the parents is true. I also just think, and I've heard him say this a million times, he said, I'm probably the only coach in America that wants more practice time in the summer. Like I can tell you, and I know you know people in this profession, Mark, there's a lot of guys, they want to go back to, 2003 when the season ended. Yeah. And you basically, you didn't see your kids again until September 1st. They want to play golf. They want to hang out. And Dan Hurley, and I've heard Tom Moore say this in interviews and everything. Basically, if the kids are on campus, we're on campus. Okay. Like, even if they can't practice, this isn't, and, for people who aren't lucky enough to be in the profession like we are, I'm not saying that, whatever, but like there are coaching staffs that, they'll just take 2-3 weeks a month in the summertime and just not show up, and that's not how Hurley operates. Now, I hope he's getting his mental health days in August and when it's a dead period or whatever, when the players are off campus, he's relaxing. But, I've heard stories of kids on campus, maybe the head coach takes an extra day on a long weekend, stays at the beach house, lets the assistant run practice. That's not how Dan Hurley operates. But I think to your point, these are all of the reasons why Dan Hurley and UConn are operating at the highest level.
It's a great place to finish the show. Thanks for coming on today, Aaron. Really appreciate you, man. I just wanted to let the fans know, for Aaron Torres, for Marc Zanetto, I'm asking you guys to stay locked on, stay connected, make sure that toughness meter is always rising. And as always, another episode of Locked On UConn. Go Huskies.